Ladies and gentlemen, today is Monday, March the 2nd, and if they look at the saga of the CBA negotiations, years from now in the history books, it's very likely that today is the day that will be remembered as the day the CBA talks took a turn. Let's get into it. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the CC Report. And today there is a lot of news to talk about. It's been an extremely newsworthy day in the world of women's basketball. Tonight, as I'm recording this, Unrivaled is having its semifinals in front of a sold-out Barclays Center in New York City. Very exciting stuff, exciting pictures and video coming from that event. But I'm here to talk about the CBA. I'm here to talk about the future of the WNBA. I'm here to talk about Caitlin Clark. So let's get into it. Today was an extremely newsworthy day as far as the CBA negotiations are concerned. It began today with everybody in the women's basketball universe kind of in New York City at the same time for the Unrivaled semifinals that I referenced earlier that are taking place in the Barclays Center. And at the beginning of the day, I had postulated that perhaps because so many people were in New York City that they were going to do an in-person behind closed doors type of meeting with the league, that there might be some newsworthy events coming out of that. I had no idea the amount of news that came out of just the unrivaled media availability that was happening during the morning. We have statements from Breanna Stewart, we have statements from Natasha Cloud, we have statements from Kelsey Plum, all of which indicate an extremely important shift in the mindset of the Players Association moving forward with the CBA negotiations. I said in a previous video, in several previous videos actually, that the most important question in front of the Players Association was whether there was the will to do a strike or not. Because if there was the will to do a strike, they still had leverage and could still be competitive in the gross versus net debate that has been the philosophical underpinning of the entire discussion of the CBA and the reason that things have taken so long. And it appeared as we left things last Friday that there was still the will in the Players Association to do the strike. But it appears that that has changed a little bit because all of the rhetoric coming out of the player base and the executive committee during the Unrivaled media availability was not of doing a strike, not of the gross versus net revenue sharing debate, but rather a bigger picture, a more conciliatory picture, a picture that was not focused on that one issue, but rather focused on being collaborative with the league and finding out the numbers with which, whether it was gross revenue share or net revenue share, the numbers with which the players felt that they could get a most fair deal. This is a huge mindset shift, and it could lead to us seeing a deal done before the week is out, to be perfectly honest. And that is good because the March 10th deadline is coming up quicker and quicker. And if we didn't have a deal before the week was out, it would be time to panic. But let's take a look to start out with Alexa Philippou, and shout out to Alexa Philippou from ESPN. Shout out to Annie Constable from Front Office Sports. Shout out to Madeline Kenny from the New York Post. All three of them reported these quotes at essentially the same time. Shout out also to Jeff Magliacetti, who also covers everything women's basketball in New York City as well. They all had these quotes at basically the same time. I'm going to be pulling from all of them during this discussion. And the first quote that was put up today was the quote from Kelsey Plum. She's the first VP of the WNBA, and her quote, "I want to play. The players want to play. Obviously, we're going to continue to negotiate and do everything we possibly can to get this done in a timely fashion, but obviously a strike would be the worst thing for both sides." Kelsey Plum said achieving a revenue sharing system is something the players fought really hard for and is a significant win. even if the players agree to a net revenue sharing system, Plum says, the goal could be to continue to negotiate the expense credits the league gets. And what she means when she talks about expense credits is how to determine what exactly is an expense, what exactly is not an expense that counts before the revenue sharing is triggered. So it seems like that's where they're starting to negotiate now, as opposed to just not being open to the net revenue share at all, and rather going straight to the gross revenue share. It seems like now they're dispensing with that and publicly making statements to the effect of any revenue sharing system that we get is a win for the player base. She's not wrong in this assessment, and we've talked in earlier videos about even if the Players Association were to take the deal that the league has on the table right now, it would be a huge win for the players, but it wouldn't necessarily be a win that is commensurate with the amount of massive revenue that the league is currently generating, in which teams are 50x more valuable than what they were at this point in the past CBA negotiations. So Kelsey is starting to change her framing a little bit, framing even a net revenue share deal as a huge win for the player base, which is a huge departure from what the player base was saying even a week ago regarding gross versus net revenue share. Madeline Kinney has a supplemental quote from Natasha Cloud. Natasha Cloud saying that she stands, quote, very much unified with the players. My biggest concern has always been the middleman in all of these CBAs. This isn't no knock on anyone. Our rookies have been taken care of. Our 1% has been taken care of. And that's still true in this CBA. She's not wrong, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the salary cap in the CBA and the implications that it has regarding the top of the WNBA, the middle of the WNBA, and the rookies in the WNBA, because there are still some issues to sort out there. But she has had the most nuclear temperature rhetoric of all of the players who have been willing to go on record so far. She's the one who said, we ain't effing moving off of this number until y'all move. With regard to the league, she's taken an extremely hardline stance regarding what the players are worth, what the players are valued, and what the players ought to be paid. So for her to be a part of this media scrum and for her to say sort of the things that she is saying in this quote, it's not about gross versus net revenue share anymore. It's not about pay us what we're worth anymore. It's not about any of that. Instead, her concern is more of making sure that all classes of the WNBA are represented and taken care of in the new CBA, which is a valid concern. And unlike the previous stance that she had taken, this is something that can be dealt with in the current CBA discussions, even if we only do a net revenue share. So this is a much more realistic goal that Natasha Cloud is setting forth, and it's a much more realistic goal for the Players Association to pursue in negotiations with the league as far as the CBA is concerned. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move on. The Breanna Stewart quotes. This is kind of the big quotes from player leadership that really give us the lay of the land. And her quote is, the biggest priority right now is to come to an agreement, and the biggest takeaway of all is we have agreed on revenue sharing. We just are struggling to agree on the model. Both sides need to see the wins that we do have, and then we really have to kind of collab on this. This is again restating the idea that the WNBPA is taking a step back from their gross versus net revenue sharing debate, acknowledging the fact that they have agreed on revenue sharing at all is a huge win for the players. And now it's just about back and forth. Let's try and figure out the numbers on this, which is something that is much more reasonable of an ask from the player's perspective than from switching from gross to net revenue sharing and all that would come with it. And the other thing that I'd point out about this quote is that they are standing down from their combative stance, their publicly combative stance. We've seen a lot of combative rhetoric from not only Natasha Cloud, but from other members of the WNBA PA, from Nafisa Collier, from Neko Agumake, even from Breanna Stewart herself. Much more combative stance in the past than what they are taking right now. Basically, Breanna Stewart is saying we need to be collaborative on this. And I think that that probably is the process that's going on behind closed doors. The player base is now no longer up in arms about gross versus net. Rather, they have come to the table to figure out what actually the best deal is within the confines of a net revenue sharing system. And so I think there still are negotiations to be had. Stewie says in the next quote, this is from Jeff Magliochetti, she says, I think that there are definitely negotiations that need to be done. Whether you look at our deal, the union's deal, or the league's, it's like both of them are not ready. Both are not ready to be voted on because both need to be negotiated either up or down in a number of ways. She is talking about finding the exact revenue sharing number. Even if it is a net revenue sharing number, she is talking about finding the exact number that is going to be the best deal for both the player base and for the league. If the players have surrendered on net revenue share versus gross revenue share, that means that the league can be assured that whatever deal they strike, they've already taken care of their expenses before they get to the player base. And so now it becomes about getting the best possible net revenue deal out of the league as the players possibly can. And that is a discussion that is much more palatable from a league perspective. I think that there is a lot more room to work there than they had before. So it's talking about what the actual net revenue number is. It's also talking about the housing debate, which still there is some space to go back and forth on. I don't think that it's going to take much in order for them to come to an agreement on that. And it is talking about the salary cap number, which is a number that really does need to be addressed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the translation from all of this, they're not going to strike. The strike may still technically be on the table, but it would take a severe breakdown in discussions from both sides for them to consider exercising the strike option now. Because if the player base has indeed given up the gross versus net revenue discussion, then it all becomes about just finding the correct number. And that is a much more easy discussion to be had. And just from a personal perspective on this, I have been pretty pro player during these CBA negotiations. I have said more than once that I think that gross revenue share is the fairer model. I have said more than once that I think that although the number that the Players Association was asking for was too high, that there was a compromise number of around 20 to 22% gross revenue. That would be the best number for both the players and the league to finally arrive at. But I have also said over and over again that the only way that the players are going to get any sort of semblance of what they were asking for in terms of net versus gross and in terms of the percentage share is the threat of a strike. And the league's calculation from the beginning was that the player base was not going to do the strike. And it appears from all indications that their assessment was the correct assessment, that the players, in fact, at the end of the day, do not have the stomach for a strike. And at that point, all of their leverage vanishes. The league doesn't have to come off of their net revenue position. And indeed, it did not, in order to achieve what appears to be a fast track to a deal going forward. So even though I've been relatively pro player in this, even I acknowledged that without the strike, they had no real leverage. And so it's not surprising to me that this is the turn that things took. And so all of this to say, the final quote from Breanna Stewart is that we did get a response to the Players Friday proposal from the league back on Sunday. And so we do have the WNBA's counterproposal in hand. And I think that that WNBA's counterproposal was what triggered a lot of this change in attitude from the WNBA Players Association. So let's go ahead and go to Annie Constable. Let's go ahead and go to Front Office Sports. The article, WNBA players shift tone on labor talks, quote, rev share is a win. Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart are among a group of players who believe that a strike is not in their best interest. And so let's go ahead and read some of the article. Here is the league's proposal. The league made a new proposal to the union Sunday night with a slight bump to the salary cap from $5.65 million to $5.75 million, according to sources familiar with negotiations. The league did not move on its revenue sharing proposal. That percentage will increase over the life of the deal, which multiple sources have said is an 8-year term with an opt-out after the 7th year. Both sides have found alignment on a system for sharing revenue, but they differ on the percentage. The players started off by seeking 40% of the league's gross revenue and have come down to 26% over the life of the deal. The league's offer amounts to less than 15% of total revenue based on WNBA's revenue projections. And just as a side note, they are calculating it in terms of net revenue as opposed to gross revenue. That is an important sticking point. The league made no adjustments to its previous housing proposal, which offered all players team-provided housing in the labor deal's first year. In 2027, the team providing housing would be available to only developmental players, rookies, and those signed to the league minimum. In 2028, only developmental players would be provided housing. Here is a critical new update from the latest CBA proposal from the WNBA. Additionally, the league's latest proposal includes conditions that would allow younger players to earn a max salary faster than would be possible under the current rookie scale contracts. Any player on a rookie contract selected to the first or second all WNBA team would be eligible for a max contract in their 4th year, and if signed to that extension, they would not be eligible to be cored. For example, Caitlin Clark, who was selected to the 2024 All-WNBA First Team, would be eligible to earn the standard maximum contract in 2027. Similarly, a player on a rookie contract who wins MVP would be eligible for the Supermax in their 4th year, and if signed to that extension, the core would be unavailable for them. A'ja Wilson, who was named MVP in her 3rd year of her rookie contract in 2020, would have been eligible for the Supermax in 2021. As previously reported by Front Office Sports, the Supermax would amount to 20% of the salary cap, and the standard max would be roughly 17.5%. And there are several things to point out here. Most notably, of course, as we've discussed, is the lack of movement from the league as far as the gross versus net revenue share debate, as far as the total revenue sharing numbers from the league. They essentially are completely immobile on that, and it's becoming very clear that there will be no movement, or there will be very little movement, and the movement will be more of what the net number is rather than is it going to be net versus gross. And that is just going to be very close to what the deal is. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of things regarding the CBA proposal. The first is this new idea about players on rookie contracts that make first team or second team all WNBA or who win the MVP being eligible for these year 4 contract extension. First of all, the good. This is unquestionably a massive, massive win for the player base. We've already talked about and we've observed many times about how ridiculous it is that somebody like Caitlin is being paid pennies in comparison with other players in the league. You know, the fact that she is so valuable to her team, the fact that she is so skilled, and the fact that the WNBA is making so much money specifically off of Caitlin means that Caitlin should be making more than just a rookie deal. This solves that, and it is a huge win on its face for the Players Association, whose directive partially is to make sure that the players are paid what they're worth. Huge win as well in the long term for team planning, huge win in the long term for building long term. It is something that is going to reward teams for drafting well and for developing their own homegrown players, as opposed to bringing in players from outside free agency. This is a system that is going to allow teams, if they wish to do so, to lock in their players for a long period of time, much longer period of time than they were able to lock them in before, if they wish to do so. That's the good part. The bad part of this idea is that, number one, if you're paying your rookies a year earlier, that means that you have to account for that payment a year earlier than you would do so otherwise in your salary cap. And so, for example, with the Fever, if this rule goes through, Aaliyah Boston would be eligible for a max contract extension because she made second team All WNBA last season. So she would be eligible for this max contract extension this year, right now. Like, as soon as the CBA is done, Aaliyah would be eligible for that max contract extension. And if she were to do that, then the Fever would have to account for that max contract on the books a year earlier. What that means is, for example, Kelsey Mitchell, who is in line to make a supermax contract under the old system. Previously, we would have had the opportunity to offer her a 2-year supermax deal. We could still offer her that 2-year supermax deal. However, if we have to account for Aaliyah Boston a year early, and then ultimately when we have to account for Caitlin Clark a year early, that means that Kelsey would no longer be affordable at a supermax rate 1 year earlier than we would have retained her otherwise. So under this new system, we would be paying Aaliyah Boston a max deal. We'd be paying Kelsey Mitchell a supermax contract, but only for 1 year. And then at that point, Kelsey's contract and the money that was allocated for her would transfer over and be allocated for Caitlin, because obviously you're going to want to keep Caitlin over Kelsey Mitchell, and you're going to want to keep the core of Aaliyah and Caitlin together for as long as possible. So that is the downside to all of this, is that we're having to account for these salary cap numbers a year earlier. Secondly, just the salary cap number in general is still way too low. Even at the increased rate, they had a $5.65 million salary cap proposed. They increased it to a $5.75 million salary cap imposed. The problem with these salary caps is that, according to that Front Office Sports article, each supermax contract will account for 20% of the total salary cap space for each team. So, for example, paying Kelsey Mitchell a supermax contract this year would account for 20% of the Fever's salary cap. If we also were to pay Aaliyah Boston the max contract, which a max contract, not a supermax contract, would be worth a 17.5% hit to the total salary cap for the Fever. Now we're talking about a 37.5% part of the salary cap being taken up by 2 players and 2 players alone. Then add in on top of that Caitlin Clark, who is going to be in line to make $500K with her rookie deal this season, and then next season she's going to have her contract converted into a max contract. And so now we're starting to see, if we were to retain Kelsey at a supermax, if we were to retain Aaliyah at a max contract, if we were to retain Caitlin at a max contract, now we're talking about 57. Now we're talking about, I'm just doing the math off the top of my head. Now we're talking about 55% of the Fever's total salary cap taken up by 3 players, and 9 players still having to be paid in order to meet the league minimum of 12 different players. This is going to be extremely restrictive as far as the players that the Fever are going to be able to sign. The vast majority of them are going to have to be veteran minimum contract players or minimum contract players in order to bring the Fever in under the salary cap space. So that's going to be a huge problem. In order to solve this, increasing the salary cap number and decreasing the percentages that the max contract eats out of each salary cap commensurately would be the best move in my opinion. So if we increase the salary cap to 6 million and decrease the percentages, now you're talking about a supermax only taking up about 18% instead of 20%. Now you're talking about a max contract only taking about 16% instead of 17.5%. And those percentage points matter when you're trying to make all of your money go as far as it possibly can. So that is the fix. If you were to increase it to 6 million, that would help a lot. If you were to increase it to 7 million, that would help immensely. And it would enable teams to sign one Supermax player, two Supermax players, or to utilize this 4-year extension to retain your maximum salary players as long as possible and still leave room left over for it to make sense to continue to cater to the middle class of the WNBA, which at these salary numbers, they're going to get squeezed out because if teams do retain 2 max salary cap players, or God forbid 3 max salary players, then they're only going to be able to cater to the bottom of the league that is only commanding the veteran minimum. So if you increase the salary cap, you're going to be able to better cater to players that are better than commanding the minimum salaries, but not taking up those maximum salary spots. And the other thing that this low salary cap does, the new rookie contracts are going to be taking up 10% of your salary cap space. And so it no longer becomes worth it to have a high draft pick if you already are paying 2 max salary players. It eats up too much of the cap space for a rookie who is an unproven commodity. In years in which you have a Caitlin Clark, a Paige Beckers, in the future, Juju Watkins or Sarah Strong, of course, it's going to be worth it to take those players at the top of the draft. But in years such as this year, where there is no clear superstar talent, every player that you draft is a gamble. We don't necessarily know if Lauren Betts is going to end up being worth a number 1 pick. We don't necessarily know if AZ Flood is going to be worth a number 1 pick, et cetera, et cetera. But one of these players is going to be the number 1 pick and will be paid commensurately. But if it's not a sure thing, why would a team want to use one of your draft picks on one of those players when instead you could just trade out of that draft pick and instead pick up a veteran who is cheaper and more of a sure thing? So there's a lot of work that still has to be done with these salary cap numbers. Ultimately, they do need to go up. And I think that they will go up because the salary cap numbers as they are right now, they hamstring teams. They make the team GM's jobs much harder than they need to be. And they shut out the middle class for the WNBA Players Association. So for both sides, it behooves them to increase the salary cap number to at least 7 million. So I hope that we see movement toward that. That does fall within the scope of the new negotiating tactics that the Players Association seems to be taking. And so hopefully we will see that. And then just one final thing to kind of leave us. I think that the Indiana Fever social media account has been kind of sitting on this one for a while until we got some good CBA news, until it starts looking like that we are in the home stretch, and to get us ready not only for Fever basketball, but also for Team USA basketball. The Fever posted today on their social media account a video of Caitlin doing practicing 3-point shots. You'll notice that she is playing with a FIBA basketball in this video. She is ready for Team USA. She is ready for competition. She is ready to go. And we will see her competing with Team USA down in San Juan 1 week from today. I believe that it's March the 7th that the training camp down in San Juan begins. So Caitlin's ready to go. We see her practicing her 3-point shots. She looks just as good as she ever did. And we are loading, ladies and gentlemen. That's the big thing and the big takeaway from all of this discussion is that the CBA, we are finally seeing movement from the Players Association on the CBA. It may not be the CBA that ultimately people or that the player base wanted in terms of net versus gross, but it does seem like we are circling the runway in terms of finding a resolution to this that everybody can live with. And so All it's going to take is a few numerical tweaks. It's going to take some tweaks to the salary cap, as I talked about before. But if we are able to get this deal done, and it sounds like we might have a deal done even by the end of the week, then we can start turning our focus and our attention to what comes next. We can start turning our focus and our attention to the expansion draft. We can start turning our focus and our attention to Team USA basketball, as Caitlin clearly already is focused on. We can start turning our attention to how are the Fever and how are other teams going to manage to work under this salary cap. There's so much to discuss regarding that salary cap, which is uncertain, and it depends on the actual numbers that we settle on in terms of the salary cap, in terms of, can we bring Sophie back? Can we bring Ajay Stevens in? Can we bring in other veterans? Can we do some things that prior to this salary cap discussion that we were thinking the Fever might do? It's still possible, but we need to make sure that we know what the salary cap numbers are before we start talking about salary cap strategy. But today has gone a long, long way into resolving that for us. And so, what do you guys think? Do you think that we are circling the runway? Do you think that we have an end in sight? Do you think that the Kelsey Plum and the Breanna Stewart and the Natasha Cloud Quotes are just a smokescreen? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. As always, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you did like the video, if you did like the analysis. I think that we are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel here, and I just could not be more excited. I hope that you guys feel the same way. Make sure to share the video with your friends. We have 155 subscribers at the time of recording, which is mind-blowingly insane. I can't wait to start talking about other topics with you guys. Also, just so you guys know, we are on Spotify, we are on Facebook, we are on TikTok, we are on, obviously, Twitter, at CC22Report on all those social media sites. So please make sure to go and give that a follow as well, just so that you can stay up to date. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the CC Report, and I am so excited to see you next time.